Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. I'm Connor Hibbett, filling in for Alex. As we mentioned a week ago, Alex just got married and is now on his honeymoon. Congratulations to you, Alex. Let's go over some of the more potentially overlooked matchups for this week, starting with Miami of Ohio at Bowling Green. Why are we going over that matchup? Because it's overlooked. Miami of Ohio and Bowling Green are two of the most talented teams in the MAC, if not the two most talented teams in the Mid-American Conference. This matchup, the winner of this matchup is going to ultimately play for the MAC championship. When you look at these two teams, they're both 7-4. So it's not like their records stand out or anything like that. They're not going to be playoff contenders. They're not going to be that G5 representative. They're not even going to enter the AP top 25 this season. But they are both better than their records indicate. Remember, both the Red Hawks and the Falcons had very difficult non-conference slates to open up the season. Miami of Ohio had to play a Notre Dame team, which was just recently coming off a loss to Northern Illinois. And then Miami of Ohio also had to play Cincinnati in the Big 12, while Bowling Green had to play at Texas A&M and at Penn State. There's a really good chance we see both Penn State and Texas A&M in the playoff, as well as Notre Dame in the playoff. So these two teams are both better than their 7-4 records indicate, and they've also been really good against the number the last few weeks in MAC play. It tells you the upside of these two teams, despite what they've done in the non-conference. If these two teams had more manageable non-conference slates, like in East Carolina, who currently has a winning record and is going to finish with a winning record, despite firing their head coach midway through the season, if they had East Carolina's non-conference schedule, these two teams would be talked about more. But here on the Gridiron Expert, we're going to talk about those overlooked matchups. When you look at the Red Hawks and the Falcons, they are probably, again, the two most talented teams inside the MAC. Their upside is tremendous. Miami of Ohio is a very consistent team. They're very experienced, a lot of seniors. Same with Bowling Green. In fact, Bowling Green on their roster right now has over 40 seniors, with over half of those being super seniors. And Bowling Green probably has the most talented player in the MAC, and their tight end, Harold Fannin Jr. So Bowling Green here has an opportunity to take advantage of all of these super seniors and playing at home against the defending MAC champions in Miami of Ohio. I'm really looking forward to that game. Let's go to the Conference of Chaos. And here in my notes, guys, I have for the Big 12, let's look at every single conference game for this week. I mean, really, we could discuss that. I mean, when you look at the spreads, there's a 3.5 point spread, a 2.5 point spread, a 1.5 point spread, a 2.5 point spread, and then there's a couple of 9 point spreads, and then there's a 17 point spread with Colorado hosting Oklahoma State. But most of these matchups are toss-ups, and that's the Big 12 this season. I could go over every single conference matchup, like I said in my notes. I have written down every single Big 12 game. So there's obviously a lot of matchups to look forward to. Kansas at Baylor. Kansas is currently a 1 point underdog. They've been really good against the number here recently. And obviously, Kansas has probably been the hottest team in the country over the last few weeks, having taken down 3 straight ranked opponents. That's the first time that an unranked team has beaten that's the first time that a team with a losing record has beaten 3 straight ranked teams. Way to go if you're a Jayhawks fan. And you're also creating all this, you're creating more chaos than what already was in the Big 12. Okay, I'm going a little bit on a tangent here. There's one specific matchup, though, that I want to look at in the Big 12 this Saturday, and that is Kansas State at Iowa State. Iowa State, guys, has a chance to win 10 games for the first time in program history. How crazy is that? This team was the youngest team in the entire Power Five just a season ago. They returned all that production, and they've been really good this season. You could argue that the last month or so, they haven't looked quite as good. But Iowa State, from top to bottom on their roster, you could argue is the most complete team in the Big 12, offensively and defensively. Now, they haven't been fully healthy this season at any point, especially on their defensive line and in their linebacking room. And that's going to be the question against Kansas State. We have seen this Kansas State team for this entire season, and it's been the same story. They struggle throwing the football, but they are a very good running team. Iowa State here recently, they haven't been that great in stopping the run. Now, Iowa State's secondary is one of the best in the country. So, can Iowa State's rather young defensive front six stop the Kansas State rushing attack? If Iowa State does that, they are going to win this football game. I think Iowa State's offense is going to have some success passing the football against Kansas State. Iowa State's offense has been very good this season. Iowa State moved the football very well against what's been the best defense in the Big 12 this year in Utah. Yeah, Utah's offense has not been good. We know that. And that also has to do with injuries, obviously, for the Utes' sake. But the Utah defense has still been fantastic this year. And Iowa State moved the football very well in that game. That score, that 31-28 final score with Iowa State and Utah should not have been that close. But that goes back to what I was just saying a few minutes ago. Iowa State, you could argue, hasn't looked quite as good the last few weeks. So can Iowa State ultimately finish the season with the win at home against Kansas State? That atmosphere is going to be crazy in Ames this Saturday. That might just be the best atmosphere in Ames history for Iowa State. Iowa State has a chance to do, again, something that they've never done before in school history and win double-digit games. Let's look at a couple of other ranked against unranked matchups for this weekend. How about Miami at Syracuse? Did you guys know Syracuse is 8-3? Here's something to look for. I'm posting this video on Monday, so the day before the CFP rankings come out. Don't be surprised if the committee ultimately puts Syracuse at 24 or 25 in the playoff rankings to give Miami a ranked win. Remember, the ACC right now, given all the chaos that just occurred, especially in the SEC this past weekend, the ACC is looking to try to get two teams in the playoff. Well, Miami is one of those potentially two teams. So wouldn't it help Miami's case, especially with their strength of schedule right now, if the committee were to give Miami another ranked win? Look out for Syracuse to be ranked in this matchup. We'll see if the CFP committee ultimately puts Syracuse in the top 25 tomorrow evening. When you look at the matchup here on the field between the Hurricanes and the Orange, there's probably going to be a lot of points here. Miami has been arguably the most inconsistent team when you look at each individual in-game situation. So throughout the course of each game, they are like the most high variance team. They'll give up 21 points and then they'll score 21 unanswered. They are very undisciplined, but when they have to turn it on, then when they have to turn it up another notch, they do it. So Miami probably has the highest ceiling in the ACC this year. In fact, I would also make the case that outside of the SEC and Big Ten, if you're looking for a team that has the upside to potentially make a run, Miami is probably that team. I don't know if they'll do it because I don't know if I trust their coaching enough. I'm going a little bit on a tangent here with Miami. Point being, Miami's a high variance team playing against a Syracuse team that has that's been very good offensively, especially passing the football with Ohio State transfer quarterback Kyle McCord. You know, I find this interesting with Kyle McCord. At Ohio State, he was considered to be average, decent, maybe good to some people, but certainly not great. And then once he transfers to Syracuse, everyone starts hyping up Syracuse like, oh my gosh, they got a guy from Ohio State. Isn't it interesting here with the caliber of expectation with each program here? But anyways, I just think that's been interesting this year following Kyle McCord, who's honestly been really good for Syracuse. He was pretty good for Ohio State. It's just when you're at Ohio State, everything gets put under a magnifying glass and you get scrutinized to the nth degree. I feel bad for McCord there, but he's been really good for the Orange this year, and he's given Syracuse the opportunity to win double-digit games if the Orange do, in fact, win out. Now, you could also look at Syracuse's schedule and say, okay, Syracuse has had a manageable schedule. How good are the Orange? Regardless of how legit the Orange are, Miami has been up and down this year. Do we trust Miami to cover a 10.5-point spread? Maybe we'll have something about that on Wednesday with our best bets. Maybe we won't. You'll have to stay tuned for that. But Miami, regardless, has been very up and down, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago. This is going to be a really interesting game, in my opinion. Miami is having to go to Syracuse to play. This game could get interesting. Miami this past week against arguably the team with the lowest floor in the ACC in Wake Forest was in a one-score game of the fourth quarter. Miami ultimately ended up covering a three-touchdown spread there, which is crazy nonetheless. But that's Miami this year. So we'll see if Syracuse can stick with them. I would not be shocked if the Orange stay with Miami there. Let's look at another ranked against unranked matchup and the USC Trojans hosting the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, I mentioned a week ago, Notre Dame has been very good against the spread the last now 7 games, and they are only a 7.5 point favorite at USC. Now, you might be looking at the records, saying 10-1 against 6-5. Congratulations to USC, by the way, for defeating UCLA. USC is now bowl eligible and what's been a down year for the Trojans. When you look at their record, USC is one of the most unfortunate teams in the country. Every single one of their losses has been really competitive this year. In fact, among all nationwide teams of 3 or more losses, USC is second with only a negative 3 point. Let me look at my stats here. Look at my a negative roughly 3.5 point differential in their losses combined. So USC has been very competitive in each one of their games this year. USC has finally found a way to win some one-score games the last couple of weeks. Of course, one of those being Nebraska, who can't win a one-score game, and then against UCLA this past Saturday. So you might be looking at the spread, looking at the records, looking at the spread, like, why is the spread only 7.5? Maybe Vegas is on something here. Maybe they are on to something here. They are either on something or on to something. That's a phrase I'll use later on as you get to know me better. But maybe Vegas knows something here. Maybe, like I mentioned, with that 14.5 point spread with Notre Dame and Army, I said that I was going to take Notre Dame minus the points because I thought Vegas was trying to get people to take Army with the hook there. I don't have a take yet on this spread, other than the fact that maybe Vegas is doing something similar here, trying to get people to take either USC to cover that 7.5 point spread, or they're trying to get the people to look at the spread saying, why is it only 7 or 7.5? It's at 7 at some sports books, and trying to get people to take Notre Dame here. Point being, I'm going a little bit on a tangent here. Notre Dame is maybe not quite as good as their record given their strength of schedule not being that great, while USC is much better than their record. When you look at this matchup on the field, USC's offense has been a little up and down this year. USC's defense has actually been much improved from last year. We know what to expect with Notre Dame. Really good defense, and the offense keeps improving. Can the Trojans ultimately find a way to keep this one interesting? It would not shock me. USC's been competitive in every single one of their games this year. And Notre Dame, again, as I discussed last week, I didn't think Army was as good as their record, but I also don't think Notre Dame is as good as their record. So yes, Notre Dame kind of exposed an Army team who had really yet to face a true legit team this year. I do think Notre Dame's legit, but are they as good as their record? There's a difference. Notre Dame is obviously legit. You can't be top 10, top 15 in the power ratings and not be legit. But is Notre Dame as good as their 10-1 record or their top 6 or 7 AP ranking might suggest? We'll see. I mean, whenever Notre Dame makes it to the playoff, they never really look that good. USC is not a playoff caliber team, but again, the Trojans have kept things competitive in every single one of their games. It's a really interesting matchup to me. One other matchup that I want to discuss with y'all in this video, Tennessee at Vanderbilt. I mean, Vanderbilt has been one of America's teams this year, and then Tennessee has been really good defensively, up and down offensively. They've had some injuries on the offensive line, which has kind of held them back at points this season. Nico Iamaleava, please do not make me say that name 10 times fast, has been a little bit inconsistent this year. He's looked good against the average to below average teams, but hasn't looked that great against the upper echelon competition he's faced. Vanderbilt has been really good against the number of the season. I know a lot of people thought Vanderbilt was going to ultimately knock off LSU last Saturday, which I can't blame people for thinking, given the trajectory of LSU's program right now and the trajectory of Vanderbilt's program, respectively. Um, it's at Vanderbilt. You have a rivalry here. Obviously, it's rivalry week. It would not shock me if Vanderbilt gave Tennessee all they could handle. But does Vanderbilt ultimately pull off the upset? We've seen a lot of chaos in the SEC on a week-to-week basis. I think the middle of the SEC to the bottom of the SEC outside of Mississippi State is better than what it's been before. I also think the top of the SEC is not quite as dominant as what it's been before. Georgia, Alabama, LSU, they're not as good as what they've been in recent years. But then, of course, you bring in Texas, who is as good as what they've been in recent years, if not even better than they were last year. So when you look at this Tennessee Vanderbilt matchup, does the quality of talent for Tennessee ultimately overperform the quality of performance of Vanderbilt? Vanderbilt is not one of the more talented teams in the SEC, but Diego Pavia, the way that they're coached, the way that they play together, they are going to find a way to make things interesting against almost every single team that they play. I mean, really, the only team that's beaten Vanderbilt decisively this season is South Carolina. And we're going to talk about South Carolina and Clemson later on this week. So stay tuned for that video as well. But Tennessee Vanderbilt, it's a 10.5-point spread, very similar to Notre Dame at USC and especially Miami at Syracuse. You have teams that are decisive favorites, so touchdown to about 10.5 to 11-point favorites here. But it's interesting spots, and they are all on the road. We've seen a ton of decisive home underdogs that have pulled off upsets this year. It wouldn't shock me if Vanderbilt created more chaos. And if Vanderbilt ultimately wins this game, what is the committee going to do? Because right now they have a few 1 to 2 loss SEC teams that they ultimately can put in the playoff. If Tennessee loses this game, regardless if Tennessee loses this game, I think we're going to see the committee put in a 3-loss SEC team. Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Gridiron Expert. Please stay tuned for future episodes as I will be taking over for the next couple of weeks for Alex.